Joining us right now is Karim Sadjadpour. He is Middle East Program Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And Karim, what do you make of what's happening, these strikes? How effective were they? What do you think the retaliation will be?
Well, this is an incredibly significant moment. Not only have Iran's nuclear sites been damaged, and we'll see the full extent of that in the coming days, but Israel also decapitated, assassinated Iran's senior nuclear scientists and some of its top military officials. One person in particular, Ali Shamkhani, was someone who was, arguably Iran's top strategist and was often thought of as someone who, after the current supreme leader dies, could play a major leadership role inside Iran.
What will Iran do in retaliation? What do you think is the expected, maybe the measured approach, or the not so measured approach?
So Iran has a very weak hand at the moment because historically in these situations, it would, for example, threaten to unleash its proxies, Lebanese Hezbollah. But what's happened over the last 6 months is that Israel decimated one of Iran's proxies in the Palestinian territories, obviously Hamas. It decimated Lebanese Hezbollah, which led to the collapse of another of Iran's key allies, the Assad regime in Syria. So in the regional context, Iran has a very weak hand. Now some of its top military commanders have been assassinated. Another thing that Iran would traditionally do in a situation like this is to go after oil installations in some of the Persian Gulf countries, in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But Iran knows that those countries have a very close relationship with the Trump administration. If they were to launch attacks on oil installations, it would likely trigger a massive U.S. military invasion. So the big question now is what Iran chooses to do with its nuclear program. Does it bide its time, or does it announce that it's no longer simply pursuing nuclear energy and it needs to move forward with a nuclear weapon? Even that is fraught with enormous risk because its nuclear program has been pretty thoroughly penetrated, and that would likely trigger U.S. military action. So Iran has a very weak hand right now, and they're led by an 85-year-old supreme leader who knows how much cognitive bandwidth he has to deal with a crisis like this nowadays.
Karim, Halima Croft was just here, and she said that even though there were these attacks on the nuclear institutes, some of the places that were hit very hard, that most of the refining is being done right now at Fordo, and that is very well fortified. That was not attacked, and that probably would require U.S. support and intervention for Israel to be able to go after that. How significant is that? How well armed does that still leave Iran? And, we heard reports that they could have been within 15 days. That hasn't been confirmed, but they could have been within days of being able to have the ability to put together a nuclear bomb. How far do you think this sets things back?
The intelligence reports that I've seen has consistently shown that they're just weeks away from having enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon. But to actually assemble a bomb that's usable, I think they were probably more like at least 6 months to a year away. But as Halima importantly mentioned, that facility in Fordo, outside of the city of Qom, which is buried perhaps as much as half a mile deep below a mountain, is something, it's debatable. The Israelis say that they can reach it. Most American generals say that they cannot. And so Iran's nuclear program hasn't been totally eliminated. So as I mentioned, that's now the big question. Does Iran continue to negotiate with the United States? There were meant to be negotiations this coming weekend on Oman. I'm skeptical that Iran will attend those negotiations, but at the same time, Iran doesn't have a great hand to play, because if they announce that we've now been forced to pursue a nuclear weapon, that will trigger not only Israeli, but likely U.S. military action. And Iran's program is so thoroughly penetrated by by Israeli intelligence in particular, that I don't think they would be able to get away with that. So at the moment, Iran has been really humiliated, and they don't have a great hand to play.